Was that not your favourite era? I mean, was that, because it was very deregulated, so many comics.
You mean like the early 50s and all that?
Yeah, 50 to 55.
Yeah, that period. Yeah, I mean, there were actually a lot of good comics I liked, but it was really a low point for me because I didn't really read the EC comics, good as they were, because they were horror comics things, and I just, I wasn't at ease with those. I could see they had good writing and artwork. I would glance at them on the newsstands and remember them years later from that momentary glance. I'd remember the ending, and when I'd run to a guy 10 years later, I'd say, what about the story where this happens or that happens? And so forth. He'd say, I thought you said you never bought these. I said, I never bought any of them. I saw them for 2 seconds on the stands once, glanced through them, saw the ending, and that was it. But, you know, I just didn't buy them because I was really depressed. Once they killed All-Star Comics at the turn of 1951, when the Justice Society died, and with it that meant Hawkman, Green Lantern, Flash, everybody except Wonder Woman was suddenly gone, and I was reduced to Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, who were not my favorites, and a few other characters, but they were mostly dying out over the next couple of years. You know, I just wasn't quite as enthusiastic about things and so forth, but I just accepted the fact that was the way things were going to be with comics from now on, and I was just going to enjoy them less, and that was perfectly okay. I still enjoyed the ones I enjoyed until one day in the summer of 1956, when I went uptown to one of the drugstores, the 2 drugstores in town, to buy some fireworks, because July 4th was coming. It must have been a day or 2 before, and could have even been on, they probably didn't even close before then. And I saw this thing on the newsstand which said, Showcase presents The Flash, and it was a guy who didn't look like The Flash to me. He's all in a big red costume with just a yellow lightning bolt in his chest, but it was called The Flash. It was DC Comics, and it looked like, you know, the same character just finally got around to changing his clothes, you know. And to me that was great because it meant, you know, maybe that kind of character could come back. They'd made all these various attempts, you know, a couple of years earlier with the Captain America and so forth, but they never lasted, so who knew? So I just grabbed it up, and and it took several years, but I was glad to see those characters come back, and that revived my interest. But I'd have kept on reading comics, you know, no matter what. I just adjusted to whatever they had, you know, and that would just been a certain percentage of my reading.
I mean, you're a Golden Age historian as much as anything. You're responsible for bringing back a lot of Golden Age characters. When you were originally reading during that period, say, the early 40s to the end of the Golden Age. I don't hold your opinion. Yeah, that period. Were there any favourite Golden Age characters? I mean, we could include ones which are generally forgotten, the ones that were in NATO, for example, like Fighting Gang.
Well, most of the ones that were the best have been either brought back or people know them. You know, somebody's brought back almost everything now, at least in a few stories. My favorite was always Hawkman, as much because of Joe Kubert's artwork, although I followed it even when other artists drew it, because I loved that design of the character. It was so nutty. He had these big wings, you know, and he had this weird mask that had a beak. You know, it actually had a beak upper and lower when I started reading it. It had wings on his helmet, even in addition to the other wings. And there was just something, and Joe Kubert was this fantastic artist. Even at that time, he was maybe 24, 25, already a veteran of the field. Coming to it like at the age of 13.
And he got so much better as well, that's the thing.
He got better, but I still like his 1946 work better than anything else, which he never could quite understand. But I've got one page of Joe Kubert artwork at home, and it's from 1946, you know, and I don't care, I could care less if I ever had a Sergeant Rock page, even though that was probably better, although I would love to have had his 1950s Tor, or maybe even a Viking Prince page. But Tor was, I think, his best work at about 51 or so.
Yeah, I remember that. I mean, but, yeah, you kind of got segued into the DC thing in the early 60s with Brave and the Bold when you did all that.
But that was my favorite, but I liked, you know, all that stuff and so forth. I read almost, you know, I couldn't buy them all. I mean, you know, dimes were hard to come by in the 40s. My family didn't have that much money.
So you had a budget?
I had a budget. Sometimes I had to, the things I always bought a copy of All-Star. I think I bought every month, I think I managed to buy Flash comics, because that had Flash, Hawkman, and Johnny Thunder, and sometimes later the Atom in it, so it had 4 of the members of the Justice Society. I liked Green Lantern a lot. I loved Captain Marvel, the original Captain Marvel. I liked the Marvel characters. The stories weren't so good, but I loved the concept in order of Human Torch, Submariner, Captain America. Not as much Captain America. He was okay, but...
So the Tommy ones were not that special to you compared to, say, the DC ones in the 40s?
I like DC the best, but... and Fawcett would have been right up there. They had the best writing, I think. Marvel, they never paid much attention to the writing in those days. You know, Stan was happy, I think the pages came out in the right order. And because that's really all they cared about. They really didn't care that much, I think. And a lot of the other companies, you know, cared about. I'm sorry if I'm not ever looking over here, because I guess it's because, you know,
You're looking at me,
you're there, and, yeah.
So did you ever read anything like any of the Fox titles, the really minor ones like The Flame or
Well, The Flame was gone, but I read the late Blue Beetle, who was a bad character. Like one month he was shooting guns, the next month he was flying around and bulletproof. I mean, you know, they didn't, that was a bad, schlocky company. And I read Phantom Lady because, you know, she was, you know, I was I was 8, 9 years old. There was this woman in, you know, kind of a scanty outfit, the cape running around. That was interesting.
Well, at that point, yeah, the good girl nothing had come in handy with Jack Heyman and...
There wasn't much of it. You Wonder Woman, and nobody's going to ever get lustful over Wonder Woman the way she was drawn, you know, she was a good character.
Yeah,
but I just liked all that stuff. I just liked the media, but I also liked, you know, as I said, Mad and Polo and, you know, the Donald Duck comics. You know, I didn't know about Karl Barks at the time, but I read that stuff, you know, quite often. And I could tell that was better than most of the funny animals. But I read DC's funny animal. They had the Dodo and the Frog, which I liked a lot. You know, nobody remembers the Dodo and the Frog, but I liked that. I like that.
Yeah, you get to the late 50s, and suddenly the Silver Age is sort of about to begin. I mean, it happened by chance with Marvel because of the implosion and had to reduce the vast amount of titles and the distribution deal with DC, etc. Did you notice things were afoot when you started? Obviously, you would have noticed because you started Alter Ego. Yeah. Did you think that things were going to start to happen again as a result of changes?
Yes, I did, but I wasn't the one who started Alter Ego. That was a guy I hadn't met at the time who was a fellow Missourian, but by that time a young college professor, about 6 or 7 years older than me. I was 20 or so, and he was, you know, late 20s, 26, 27. And he's decided he wanted to start a newsletter. Not a fanzine, which is a term that came from science fiction fandom, but he wanted to start a newsletter about the return of the superheroes. He wasn't thinking about the 40s so much, or the future, just the return of them, you know, the Fly, which at that time was mostly DC, and also the Fly and Archie, you know. And so in late 1960, right about the time we started communicating, we were put together by Julius Schwartz and Gardner Fox of DC Comics, because they said, you both like Justice Society, maybe you'd enjoy, you know, communicating or something. So, and it turned out that turned out to be, you know, pretty much of an understatement. And Jerry decided to start this newsletter. It was going to be called the JLA newsletter. And then he went to New York by sheer coincidence, because he was a professor. He had to speak at a college in the New York area, so he went by DC Comics. And Julie Schwartz, you know, the editor of Flash, Justice League, Green Lantern, who had been the editor of All-Star and other comics back in the 40s, showed him some science fiction fanzines, especially Zero with an X, which was a sort of combination science fiction and general fanzine, and had articles on comics in them. And Jerry, at this point, changed. He wasn't thinking about a newsletter anymore. He wanted to do a whole magazine. He didn't do it on high-class mimeograph, the way that the Lupoffs did Zero, but he did it on Spirit Duplicator, which is, you know, it's purple. You know, it was just, you had to put in the masters and turn them, and you could only get 100 or 150 copies. Then you got to trace a new master or type a new master or something. It's just an awful, you know, process. It's just this side of carving on cave walls, you know, as far as we're concerned. Thank God I never had to do any of that, because I have no, you know, he did all that. All I did was send in stuff. I was called the co-editor of the early issues of Alter Ego, but I never edited anybody except myself, you know, and Jerry was the editor. I was just in there as a contributor, really.
Yeah, and at that time you were also writing a lot of letters to DC mainly, is that right?
Mostly DC, when I remember the first bunch of letters I wrote, one of which then got published, was I sent letters to 3 editors, not by name, because the name wasn't listed as that individual thing. I sent one to the editor of Green Lantern, and one to the editor, which was actually hadn't started, he was still in the showcase, one to the editor of Justice League, that had just started, and one to the editor of The Flash. Well, you know, they all go to the same guy, Julius Schwartz, because he was the editor of all of them, they're not listed as such. And that's when he got back to me and gave me Gardner Fox's home address and said he had not only was writing Justice League, but had written a lot of Justice Society. I didn't say that he had actually co-created the series. And then Jerry said, oh, I just sold all my old All-Stars a few months ago to this guy named Jerry Bales in Detroit. So he sent me Jerry's address, and that's when we kind of got together. A couple of months later, Alter Ego came out of it and so forth. But you know, if we hadn't done it, probably somebody else would have started it. We stole all the stuff from sort of science fiction fanzine, all those terms like fanzine and so forth, they all came, and the idea of conventions, it all came from science fiction fandom that had been there first starting in the 20s and 30s especially.
Yeah, that's where Segan Schuster came from, as I remember.
Yeah, they were science fiction fans, yeah. And the artist John Gienta, who drew Legion of Superheroes later, was writing science fiction and comics columns for fanzines. And Forey Ackerman was their buddy writing for him, you know, who started the wonderful famous Monsters of Filmland later.
Yeah. What did you think of the Silver Age versions of the Golden Age characters? Did you like them more or less? Did you find them inferior? What did you do with them?
I liked them. I missed the other characters, but you know, I just accepted the fact these guys were never going to, you know, come back, because once you got a new Green Lantern and a new Flash and a Justice League and a new Atom even that wasn't anything like the old one, and you had the Atom, the Hawkman, who was very much like, you were never going to see those old characters again. So I just kind of gave up on them, you know, and never figured you'd see them. And all of a sudden, Julian Gardner, however it happened, suddenly, you know, blew Jerry's in my mind by doing Flash of Two Worlds, in which you know, we were always agitating to bring him back. And we never gave up on it entirely, but we didn't believe it would really happen. And I think somehow, I think it was probably, it shouldn't have been, because we didn't buy enough comic books to be a real pressure group. But at the same time, I suspect that the letters that we wrote, the two of us, and a few other people like us, but the two of us wrote a lot of letters, we probably influenced Julie Schwartz, the editor, more than we should have, because he did things that, you know, they weren't inevitable, like bringing back a Golden Age character when you already had another one. I think one example, which was almost entirely me, was they did one story with the new version of the Three Dimwits characters from The Flash. They were imitation of the Three Stooges, and I had always got a kick out of the old comics, so they tried them for one story. The readership didn't seem to like it, did another, but I'm sure I'm not the only person that asked for that. And Julie shouldn't have really listened to us, but he did. And sometimes, you know, like with the Earth 2 stuff, it worked out because he came up with a really great way to do it.
So in other words, all that continuity thing that kind of did begin to spiral out of control was done to you.
It's possible. I'm really big on continuity in comics, because I believe if you're expecting people to follow comics more than a few years, and you know, at that time they weren't. They figured 4 or 5 years a kid, and then that's the end of them. Then you have to grab some new ones. But quickly they discovered, Julie, even before Stan got in the game, that he was getting letters from people in college and high school. I was in college about to graduate. Jerry was a college professor. There were a few others. You know, that he was getting letters like that from people saying these are nice versions of the old characters. And I think to a generation that didn't get to go to college, even, you know, because of the Depression and various things, I think that people like us made more difference than, as I said, we maybe should have, because, you know, we were more educated, you know, and so forth. And some people get snowed by that. I mean, you know, think of Charlie Gaines and letting Marston come in and create a weird character like Wonder Woman. He was snowed by it because he was a well-known psychologist, I think, as much as anything, you know. And I think that there was a certain, Stan had that too, you know, of just being impressed by people because they had a college degree in that day. It doesn't happen now because everybody's got one, but at that time, you know, it made a difference.
It's amazing, because I didn't know that in a way Stanley kind of did steal a march on Julie Schwartz, because he, as you said, he did listen to college-age people and people of
Well,
that age.
Julie didn't really go after them, but he catered to them anyway. But he wasn't. But he was aware of the fact they weren't very big from the very beginning. One of the earliest letters by 61, 62 at least, that Stan wrote to Jerry Bales, you know, he mentioned that he was consciously going after an older audience. Now, obviously, he was also writing comic kind of the way he wants, but he was also thinking about the audience. And it wasn't just an accident. He wasn't, you know, he was thinking about the audience, and he wanted that older audience. He was saying he didn't know if he'd get it, but it turned out he did.
So we fast forward a little bit to the mid-60s, and the irony, of course, is that you ended up at DC first before Marvel, but it wasn't necessarily all that happy an experience with Mort Weisiger on board as then editor.
Very few people had a good experience with Mort Weisiger, and I wasn't one of them. Well, I'd always wanted to work for DC. It never would have occurred to me Marvel, even wanted anybody. Stan was writing virtually all the books. Never occurred to me he didn't want to. There were only a handful of them. How did I know how long it takes to write a comic book? You know, he's writing, he's doing a great job of it. So I never even thought about that. But I was sort of interested. I wasn't really thinking I could get into the field. Maybe I could write an occasional script from the Midwest. But, you know, it just happened that I got this job offer just after I had accepted a college fellowship and anything to get out of teaching high school. And, you know, so all of a sudden I get a letter from Mort Weisinger offering me the job as assistant editor of Superman, the Superman comics. I had never exchanged more than like one letter, I think, with Mort Weisinger. But he was a good childhood friend of Julie Schwartz, to whom I did write a lot of letters. So Mort conferred with Julie and says, I was thinking about hiring this guy, write you a letter, what do you think? And Julie evidently said, oh yeah, he's good, he's, you know, a young college, high school teacher, and, you know, I like it, you know, and so Mort, you know, hired me and then proceeded to torture me.
Yeah, I mean, mind you, in the end, you'd been presiding over a pretty strange period at DC. The Silver Age was very, very odd indeed.
So they were beginning to feel this pressure from Marvel. During that week or two that I worked there, I mean, I remember Mort calling me in to show me with pride this latest cover, probably by Kurt Swan or something, of Superman. And the big thing he wanted to show me was the title, or the biggest thing on the cover. It says, "It's kill or be killed," because that was the kind of thing that Mort Weisinger would never put on a Superman cover. This was mostly about, I wonder if Lois will discover who I am, you know, that kind of thing. It was always about that, or why does Superman suddenly have 3 heads, you know, or something like that kind of thing. But all of a sudden it was kill or be killed, and he was wanting to show me that they were beating the competition, because he knew I also liked Marvel Comics. He didn't know that 3 days later I'd end up working for them.
Yeah, but that's what happened in the end. I mean, it was a little bit by accident that you got in contact with Stan Lee.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to meet him, you know. He had sent me, once I had missed, somehow I had managed to miss Spider-Man number, was it 4 with Sandman, the one that introduced Sandman, something like that. And I wrote him a letter, said, could I buy it from the company? And he just sent me a copy. That's the only time I think I ever exchanged a letter with Stan. I wrote a letter they printed in Fantastic Four number 5, the 3rd column, but I never corresponded with Stan. But I wanted to meet him because he was writing the best comics. As much as I like Gardner Fox and John Broome and their stuff, Arnold Drake writing Doom Patrol, Stan was obviously writing the best comics, and plus he'd given me that free Spider-Man, and might be worth something someday. And so I wrote him a letter. I was in a hotel in Manhattan, but I wrote him a letter to, you know, 20 blocks away or something, because I didn't know about calling or anything. And he called back a few days later and said, yeah, you know, I'm too busy meeting anybody for a drink. I live out on Long Island. I'm never here. He didn't want me or anybody else particularly. He just wanted to go over and write comics and count his money. And so he said, they said, we got a writer's test. Would you be interested in taking that? I said, I'm always looking for I'm really looking for a writer. And I wasn't looking for a job. I was miserable at my job. But it never occurred to me really to leave because, you know, I was just there for a week or two. You don't give up that easily. It was getting worse, it seemed, rather than better. But still, but I couldn't resist the idea of taking a test, writing some artwork just for the heck of it. So I just, you know, maybe I didn't get to meet Stan. So I sneak up there in my lunch hour, you know. It's about 10 blocks away. It takes 10, 15 minutes to walk, and then, you know, but I have to make that and grab a fast hot dog at Navix, and then I'm, you know, back. And I just pick it up, but Stan doesn't come out. He sends out the secretary, Claude Steinberg, who later became, you know, a good friend. And he, so I sneak it back the next day. I wrote it that night. I didn't have time to polish it. Didn't even type at a table. I had to type with my little portable sitting on a chair while I'm sitting on the bed, and my back just, you know, it was never that good in those days. It was just, really got to hurting. It had collapsed on me once or twice before, so I was a little worried about that. But so I just get, okay, no second draft, this is it. Next day I sneak up and maybe I'll meet Stan this day. So, but Saul Brodsky, the production manager, comes out, takes it from me, and says, how'd it go? I say, fine. That's it. You know, so I just forget about it because I figure I'll never hear from him again. The next morning I get a call, and right away I read at DC while I'm proofreading a Supergirl story, and there's and it's Flo on the line. I recognize her very high-pitched voice, you know, says, hello, Roy, you know. And she didn't identify herself, and certainly hadn't told anybody she was from Marvel Con, they wouldn't have put her through. And she says, and I said, hello, Flo. I recognized her voice for the minute or two I had spoken with her. And she says, I'm a spy today, you know, can you come over to see Stan at noon? So I sneaked over there again. By this time, the job was getting worse and worse. But again, I still wasn't thinking that much about it. I talked to Stan. He never mentioned the writer's test. I still don't know to this day, what he thought exactly of it. But about 15 minutes or so after we met, after we were talking about stuff and so forth, he just gets up and walks to the window and looks down on Mass. We're on the 4th, 5th floor there, and he says, so, what do we have to do to hire you away from National? National was the real name of DC at that time. Nobody called it DC in the industry. And so I said, well, just offer me a job. I said, I don't like it there. I had been offered $110 a week. And when I got there, he changed it to 100. And, it was supposed to be a 2-month trial period. When I got there, it became 2 weeks. Although, I don't know what was done. And I said, well, what about the $110? He pointed toward the cubicle where my predecessor still worked, Nelson Bridwell. He said, I can't pay you more than I'm paying that idiot. You see what a nice guy he was, job in a hut, So I said, well, so Stan offered me the 110. I confess, I'd taken 100. And, so I went back. I was about a half an hour late getting back from lunch. Mort calls me in. He says, a couple of the guys around here, I think this was maybe Julie and Ed Eisenberg, who's production man. And he said, they've been telling me that maybe I'm a little hard on you. I could have said, yeah, do you think so? But he'd been hard on everybody. Very few people had good experiences with him. And so he starts telling me, well, I forget what it was exactly, because I just kind of interrupted him after a sentence or two. I said, well, it's very nice, Mort, and I appreciate that, and I admire your work, your talent, and everything. But I said, it's all kind of academic, because I've accepted a job working for Stan Lee. And I didn't say Marvel, I didn't say Marvel, I was working for Stan. And he just stared at me, didn't believe it. I said, well, I think you need somebody else. I said, I think you should keep Nelson. I said, I think he'll take this abuse you keep out, and he's good, he's better than anything. And I said, but I told Stan that he wanted me to come to work right away, but I said, I'll stay another 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever you need, because I won't leave you in the lurch, You brought me up here to New York, I won't leave you in the lurch. He said, you're a spy for Stan Lee, get out. That was it. So thank God he did. That Stan had been unhappy to hear I couldn't come back. So here I am like an hour later, I'm back in his office. Here I am, boss. He just don't want me. And I ended up writing a Billy the Model story over that weekend. And it worked out pretty well. Stan and I, we had our differences, but it was definitely improvement from Mort Weisinger. But then, 3 years with an angry mob would have been an improvement from Mort Weisinger. And he and I never spoke again. I saw him at somebody's funeral about a year later, so someone we knew in passing had died. And we saw each other from across the room, but that was about as close as it came. I wouldn't talk to him, but he wouldn't. He didn't want to talk to me.
I don't think he was at DC for that much longer. I'm pretty sure.
He retired about 1970. He was always threatening to retire, and they finally took him up on it. I think he kind of regretted it, and because he only died of it. He died just a couple of years later. I think he really needed that job. He hated it because he hated doing this stuff for kids. He'd been a science fiction fan like Julie, and he had a sign up. He took it down that day sometime when certain people would come in, but he had a sign. Remember, we are writing for 8-year-olds.
I still understand how he did that.
Yeah, and the other thing is, he did this to me, he did this to a number of other people before and after me. He would drag out a check. He was working for Reader's Digest, which was a really big American, you've seen the Digest-sized magazine. It would do short versions of articles, books, and so forth. Very big magazine at that time, and he did a column for it on things you could get for free, which of course he would have been an expert on. And he said, he would drag out a check because he would be paid like $1,000. That's a lot of money back in '65, And he would always show checks to people, to me and to several other people I knew over the years, to show that he was a real writer. He wasn't doing this stuff. He was a real writer. He wasn't just a guy sitting behind a desk, and so forth. Maybe he never cashed that check. Maybe it was the same check for 5 years. I don't know. But if he just really didn't like being in comics and everything. He had a love-hate affair with himself, and yet his daughter said that whenever he'd say, he wanted to be anonymous, and when they go to a resort or something, he said within 20 minutes, everybody knew he was the editor of Superman, and they didn't know that from anybody except him. So it was a love affair and a hate at the same time.
It's incredible. If he hadn't been so inflexible, who knows what would have happened at
So
DC.
he was a talented guy. He was the co-creator of Aquaman, Green Arrow, Johnny Quick,
Bizarro Superman.
Yeah, okay, and even if he stole ideas from other people, he moved them around. He was a great puppet master. He was just learning it a few weeks after the
Speaking of puppet masters, no, that's not quite fair. When you moved to Marvel and you had Stanley
Giordano to the editor to DC and had a nice career, and a good writer. But Stan just didn't relate to it. He had been disappointed. He hired him, and then the guy couldn't proofread. He didn't understand how to proofread a comic. Well, it's a weird thing, but some people take to it and some don't. I took to it right away because, but somehow Steve, though a big Marvel fan, did not. He was an English major. I don't quite understand why, but it didn't work. But then he tried writing a Western. It was a Two-Gun Kid or something. And, the splash page wasn't quite right, the dialogue, and he had got me to help him a little, to talk it over before he did it. So when he's berating us, with Steve on one side of it and me on the other, and he's berating Steve for this writing, this is bad and that's bad. And I said some little innocuous thing about, well, this is fairly good, isn't it? And he said, and he just turned to me, looked at me with this kind of stare, he said, the less I hear from you at this point, the better. So I mean, there were limits, but he was a good boss, but he'd be kind of stern and everything, and but mostly he was good.
He understood the power of words with the images. I mean, that was the key thing about him. He could conduct the orchestra. I mean, when you started writing the titles that you're best known for at Marvel, first of all there was, X-Men is in there, and of course the Avengers. The writing noticeably became a bit more serious, a bit more sort of sophisticated. Was that to do with the times? Was that to do with how America was evolving politically, or was it just your contribution? Did you notice the... It
was just the difference between Stan and myself. Stan was the most important person, at Marvel, and Jack Kirby maybe a close second, and without Jack, probably Stan wouldn't have been able to do what he did anyway, so it took the two of them. But what I brought was not better writing per se, or anything like that, certainly not for Marvel, but I think it's just the fact that unlike Stan, who certainly could have, benefited from a college education and he had a chance to get one, I think it's just the fact that, I had a chance to go to college. I was not an English major, but I became an English teacher, and, was interested in English history and, literature. I mean, not a particularly well-read, person or anything like that, but what literary instincts and thoughts I had, I brought to the comics. Stan did too, but it was, it was limited to what? The Bible, and so forth, which, everybody in that generation, grew up kind of familiar with. Even if he was Jewish, he was still familiar with the New Testament too. So then, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, which Stan loved to quote from, a certain amount of Shakespeare based on, a little reading here and there and seeing the plays, just a nice feel for language. And I had that, plus I had, my own reading in a lot of different areas and so forth. So in that sense, I suppose, I broadened it. It's the same way that other people came later, had other experiences that went beyond, what I have. We're just all, little dwarfs standing on each other's shoulders, and eventually you make a giant,
You could see how he must have been a bit of Shakespeare in those bullpen bulletins.
Yeah, Stan really liked that. He always called it the what-ho Horatio, but I don't think Shakespeare actually said what-ho Horatio. But that was the way it stands. He just liked that feel. You notice that Thor, over a period of several years, he started off speaking almost like a regular person, and then he became a little more formal, and finally he got to that whole Shakespearean thee, thou type of thing. The funny thing is, the very best stuff he did with Kirby, right before that, like that story with Pluto and Hercules and that whole thing in there, was still before he even got to the thou stage. But he was just evolving and trying things out, and if this worked, well, maybe he could be a little more formal, until finally he was doing that thou hast, and he was one of only 2 or 3 people, myself included, who could do that. Most people didn't understand Elizabethan syntax well enough to do it. You'd have all these, I'd get somebody else to write it, even a good writer like a Len Wein, who was pretty good at it. Just, you'd suddenly come up with thou hast and things like that. No, it's not thou hast. Only Stan and Jerry Conway, I think, had an instinctive feel for that kind of language. Other people sort of got it to varying degrees. Eventually abandoned it entirely, so that's just as well.
Yeah, I think he finished with Shakespeare with Volstagg is very much full stop.
Oh yeah, and that was probably Jack, but if it, but at the same time, Stan, he had his own ideas about it. He could have done Falstaff based on his own thing. I would really love to know who had the idea for Volstagg in particular. I was disappointed in the movies because they took no advantage of what those characters were like. They're totally, it's just like the character from S.H.I.E.L.D. on TV, Jasper Sitwell. They had a Jasper Sitwell, and he had nothing in common except the name with the character in the comics. I always think that's a mistake. They should, use, if you're going to come up with that name, use something from the character.
Yeah, the Warriors 3 would have been pretty
The
good.
Goldstag is a great character.
Yeah.
And from the name right away. But again, it's probably Jack, but if Jack hadn't done it, Stan could have. It didn't really matter.
The sea change in 90s, kind of the Barbarian, I mean, it was such a different thing to do at Marvel, having done just superhero comics, and nobody discusses it.
Yeah. We were trying to get, reach more people.
And it was kind of European more than American, I felt. There's certain European tropes about it. It didn't strike me as that American compared to everything else he'd done.
It's funny because Conan is, he's set into kind of mostly Europe, I mean, it's Africa and Asia, but it's mostly Europe, and yet he was in many ways as American a character as they could be. He's made out by this, 20-something-year-old Texan, who liked that kind of thing, but it's underneath, it's got the European froth, but the cake is pure American. Conan is an American. He's not a European. I'm not saying there couldn't be a European Conan, because obviously could, but Conan is an American in Europe in a certain sense,
Kind of the Arnie early reverse.
Yeah, right. So, but I don't know. It was just something that it caught a certain amount of popularity back in the 30s in Weird Tales magazine. It was one of the more popular things in it, but never made any great shakes until the 60s, when the time was just right for that kind of fantasy, I guess, or something. You had Tolkien and Burroughs coming back, and somebody put out the Conan stories, and they. Between the stories themselves and the Frank Frazetta covers that visualize it, it became a perfect story.
And we had the War magazines also, which did have a lot of the former EC artists and Frank Frazetta, so that was also, might have been, is that an influence maybe?
I don't know, because Frank Frazetta was doing those covers for paperbacks before he was doing Warren covers.
That's true. So then there was the move to becoming, after Stan was kicked upstairs, as you said before, to being publisher, you took over as editor-in-chief at Marvel.
I didn't take over. I was editor-in-chief. As long as Stan is there, there's no question about who's in charge. Nor did I care. I wasn't eager to do anything. I wanted to do things different for Stan in certain little ways, and I could do them sometimes if Stan wasn't paying attention, or if he just gave me my head because he had some respect for my own abilities. But there was no question ever who was in charge.
So
as long as he was there until he left to. He gradually gave it up, and I think by the time Shooter came in, he saw in Shooter, somebody saw in some extent in me, somebody who understood him enough in a better way than the people came in between, as good as those people were in their own ways. He never was happy, I don't think, with any other editors he worked with, really, although he liked them, other than Shooter and myself. And once Stan left, then then things changed a little bit. But as long as Stan was there in New York, he was in charge and he wanted to be, even though that last year or two he was. Had one foot out the door on the plane to Los Angeles as soon as he could figure out a way to get there.
So it was de facto editor, even though you were editor-in-chief.
Yeah. Well, he had to approve the covers, but of course Martin Goodman was publisher and approved the covers before. So, and I never really had much trouble with that. We clashed occasionally, sure, but not that much. And and the thing I liked about Stan was if he got mad about something or he snapped, I'd say something or other. I remember he wanted to change the name of the book Cull. I'd called it Cull the Conqueror.
Oh yeah.
After Conan the Conqueror. And it wasn't selling that well, but the Cull has never for any company or at any time sold as well as Conan. It's a similar character, but not quite as good somehow. And one day we're walking down the hall, and he says, I want to change the name of Cull the Conqueror to Cull the Destroyer. That'll do better. And I said, and I just made the offhand comment, well, I doubt if that'll make much difference, And he just stopped and he said, why are you being so negative? Because to him, if he said, if he had an idea, what I was supposed to say, yes, sir, or sir, yes, sir. And sometimes he'd accept my having a different version, and sometimes he just didn't want to hear it. He just wanted me to go do it, So I did it. I could learn very quickly that Stan was not a guy that when he was done arguing or explaining things or whatever, he was done, and you just went out and did it. See, and I think the reason is that if you worked at DC, You worked with a lot of other editors. Mort Weisner was kind of the first among equals by that time. Before that, there had been others. But you had Bort, you had Julie Schwartz. There were 4 or 5 other people, Robert Cannon, and they were all kind of battling for their own little fiefdoms and things, which is why Superman and Batman couldn't be more prominent in Justice League for a while. It was all office politics. Mm-hmm. Well, Stan, my theory basically became that Stan never had any equals. There was Martin Goodman above him, and the rest of us below him, and he never had a peer. There was not another editor. He was either obeying Martin Goodman and not arguing with him too much, or he was telling other people what to do, but he never got into that give and take of having to be an equal with other editors or having to get along with anybody, because it was everybody else's job to get along with him.
So you could say that.
And he had that since he was 18 years old,
The Weisinger, you could say, was divide and conquer, whereas Stanley was more of a benign dictatorship.
Just conquer. Yeah. Yeah. But it worked for him. And the rest of us, with the exception of maybe Jack or Steve, but the rest of us, as we came in, we just accepted this because we knew that Stan knew what he was doing. And the only people I think who really didn't, the only people who didn't think Stan knew what he was doing were a few of the artists. That always surprised me. The artists, a lot of the artists, because Stan wasn't an artist, they had a real blind spot. Kirby had one. He never read anything. I don't think that Stan ever wrote. He never understood that Stan was adding anything to the story, which he definitely was from the very beginning. Steve felt that if he was doing the plotting and this and that Stan was just, figuring out words. And like I was reading something about Steve the other day, he was saying he was always disappointed and surprised that everybody was saying how he liked his work, and yet his other work, whether it's Captain Atom or Hawk and the Dove or The Creeper or Static or start to nod off after a while, Shane the Changing Man or whatever, that they never sold as well as the Spider-Man stuff that, and everything. And I was thinking, well, what is missing from that equation? What was missing was Stan Lee, and whether he plotted the stories, he was also the editor, remember, so not one page ever went out of Marvel Comics that Stan didn't say, this is okay. And once he left, Steve never had that in him, he never understood. And, guys like John Buscema, who got to, hate Stan because, they just didn't feel he understood. Well, sometimes Stan made some mistakes for these people. He was not always the best. We all make mistakes dealing with people, and Stan was not always the best, and that's why, he was alienated from Steve. Well, I think anybody would be alienated from Steve. But he wanted it that way, more power to him. And Kirby, well, Kirby hated everybody he ever worked with eventually. He got to hate Simon. Within a year or two, he got to hate Colman and so he came back to Stan, who he hated before, but he already knew. Artists are difficult people, just like writers are. But some of these guys, the writers understood that Stan was adding a lot, even if we didn't agree. The artists, I think a lot of them didn't quite understand. They thought he was there and they had to deal with him, but they didn't understand that he really knew what he was doing.
Well, I had no idea about Kirby and Simon. I always thought they got on, but anyway.
They did, they did mostly. And I don't want to give, but I just meant that I think, there would be, resentments, and I think by the time they left, there were some resentments. I think that they probably were a little better, but still, I think Kirby was just the kind of a guy that was restive if anybody else was in charge,
You didn't want any of that.
But we all are to some extent. Jack, the trouble with Jack was he gave out this myth, and in later interviews and things, he would give out stories about, what a fighter he was. And I'm sure he was a real scrapper on the streets of Brooklyn, I have no doubt. But when you talked to him with Stan or these other guys, he never said a word. He may have been frothing inside when Stan told him to change this or that, but with the exception of maybe one time, when they had a fight when he came out and tore some Hulk pages in half, but not in front of Stan. And, it was all yes, and did it, and then he'd come out and he'd rage to everybody else. Gil Kane would talk about, Jack would come out of Stan's office, they'd go out to lunch because they'd known each other for years, and he'd rage for the whole hour at lunch about Stan. But when he saw Stan next time, Stan was totally unaware. So as a result, Stan, while he was maybe not totally surprised Steve did quit because they weren't, on the same plane, weren't speaking, but Jack was more of a surprise probably, that he quit was more of a surprise to Stan even than it was, say, to me or to maybe some other people at Marvel, because he knew there were strains, but he didn't know how, I don't think he saw as much as some of the rest of us did how great those strains were.
Quite dysfunctional. He just couldn't actually voice his discontent with anything.
Yeah, well, he was just a guy, he lived at the drawing board, and everything, and he wasn't a verbal guy. Later he got to talking and building his myth and so forth. But, you know, there was a lot at the base of that, because Jack was, you know, in his own way, very much of at least a comic book genius as Stan was.
We're going to talk about your move to DC after...
She, you know, pushed out as much as going out, but by mutual agreement. I'd stayed around for 6 more years, as long as I had a contract to be my own editor and so forth. I was very happy working. I could have been going on working forever. I liked the DC characters. I had offers all the time from Carmine Infantino and then later from Jeanette Kahn to come to work for them. But, you know, I never left Marvel, but Jim Shooter came in there, and it wasn't just Jim, actually. It was also Jim Galton as the publisher. They wanted to change the way they wanted to get rid of the writer-editor thing, and I wasn't willing to do that. Marv Wolfman was the first person they did that to, and I saw that, you know, it might happen. So I wrote Jim or Paul, I never forget, said, I don't, if I'm not going to be the writer-editor, I'm leaving. But I said, I understand that instead of being reporting to Stan directly now, because Stan's too busy, even though he hadn't quite moved to LA, but I said, I understand I'll be working under you now instead of under Stan. Got no problem with that. You know, got no problem with changing that and so forth. It's okay, you know. But if I'm not writer and editor, and it's not guaranteed in writing, I'm not going to spend this couple $100 or so, or whatever it is, you know, getting the contract written by my lawyer. And he said, I said, and you did that to Marv, so I said, I figured I may as well save you the trouble. He says, well, the way we treat Marv is not necessarily, that's the weasel word, by the way, not necessarily the way we'll treat you, not necessarily. So I got the contract all done, sent it in to him. It's very simple, everything they wanted, except it says, writer-editor, I got paid a little for that. And he said, well, we can't guarantee that in the contract. Well, at this stage, I decided the bastard had lied to me as far as I was concerned. I don't care how he, so I quit. I called Paul Levitz, said, okay, I'm ready, and that was it. And, and Jim and I have sort of made our peace between us, but because it was nothing personal, there was no personal animosity. He was out to kill everybody, But that's okay, but he was a talented guy, he did a lot of good things for Marvel. I think Let Me Go wasn't one of them, but it worked okay for me, I suppose, because I got to write my favorite comic book to write of all time, more than Conan, more than Avengers, Invaders, or whatever, which was the All-Star Squadron book, which I enjoyed and would still be writing, today if I could. But it was probably a bad career move, because, I never made the impact at DC that I made at Marvel, nor was I interested in it. I remember what Barry Smith, the Conan artist, said when he was about to leave Marvel, and he was supposed to do Batman or something, and I said, why do you want to go to DC? Says, instead of staying at Marvel, you could do Conan, you could do Heroes, wherever you want to do. He says, I'm sort of losing interest in comics, and going to DC is a little like quitting comics. That was kind of funny, 71 or 72, but later I got to feel what he made, because DC did good comics, I loved their characters, but there was a different feeling. I felt I was just moving, down, I could sort of do it, but I didn't really, care. I only cared about my own stuff at that stage and not anything else. And I enjoyed it, and when that sort of ran out after a few years, I really never had any interest in DC anymore, and I was happy when I was able to come back to Marvel, even as not an editor,
Sure. And when you were at DC, of course, you worked with your missus over there.
Yeah.
She's very nice. And you had a little anecdote about how she was the first person ever to write Wonder Woman, or having to do with Chris.
Yeah. I was writing Wonder Woman, they'd asked me to write Wonder Woman, and but then they made me do a thing that had every character in it, and they chopped out a third of the book and gave it to the Huntress in the back, and so I said, you're not giving the emphasis to Wonder Woman you said you were, so I quit soon after, so did Gene Coler, who didn't like drawing it anyway. But they had asked me to come back to write the special number 300. Why, I don't know, it was an extra size book, and so I got Dan to work with me there in 1980. Something like that. And she became, I gave her credit, so she became the first woman to ever get a credit. She wasn't the first woman to write Wonder Woman. If you ever see my magazine, Alter Ego, we had an interview with the 90-something-year-old lady who wrote dozens of Wonder Woman stories back in the mid-40s. Joy, she had several different names. And Murchison was the name that made actually what she had then. But, she never got any credit. So and I think in the same issue, we had the first woman ever to get credit as drawing Wonder Woman, who was Jan Dorsey. So that was all the same issue. I don't think she was necessarily my choice, but I thought it was kind of nice to do that with Wonder Woman number 300. After 300 issues, you finally got a woman working on the book out in the open.
She became a very decent artist. We got a few
Now
minutes.
they've taken over. I mean, Gail Simone has rewritten the origin of Wonder Woman. I mean, I've read Sonia. Somebody asked me about it. Says it doesn't count. I made up Red Sonia. Her origin doesn't count. I don't care what they do in movies or anything else.
I forgot to mention Red Sonja.
That's
fine.
okay. Everybody does.
I shouldn't have. Time for a couple of questions. Jump over there.
Only because I love All Star Squadron. Do you feel that maybe that was a victim of Christ on Infinite Earths, or was it a victim of poor sales at the end?
Well, it was not selling as well at the end as it sold at the beginning. I could never replace Jerry Ordway and Rich Buckley, who had done the early issues and so forth. But it was doing okay. I think it would have limped along, maybe, and so forth. No, it was all that damn Crisis, and everything, which was a well-done book by Marv and George Perez, but which destroyed what I liked about DC Comics. And once that was gone, I had no more interest in DC Comics, past just the idea of a paycheck, and everything. I cooperated with it. You could, there's all sorts of letters. I did. What you're going to do? If they're going to do something, they're determined to do it. I may as well help them, and and I made money out of it by doing issues that would sell more because they tied in with Crisis. I'm in it to make a living, but I despise it from the minute. And if I could have undone it at any point, or suddenly say stop, I would have done it. I wouldn't have even cared it hurt or helped DC. I was only interested in my own stuff at that time. But I think I would say that All-Star Squadron, I feel like there hadn't been for the Crisis, I think we could have, we've been up to about 300 or 400 issues by now, and we might almost have got to 1943. That's the one comic book, although Conan would be probably, or even Invaders would be a second or third. They're the only comics I think that I could go on writing forever. The only one, All-Star Squadron and Conan and Invaders are the ones that I feel I could write them forever because they're set in the Hyborian Age and World War II, and I don't have to look at television or movies or out my window to know what the world is like.
But I think even as a kid, I felt the love that you were pouring into each issue. And I certainly learned a lot about the history of America in the war, although you weren't on it for as long as us.
And a lot of Britain in there too.
Yeah. It was just stunning. And the Ordway and all of that, and Infinity Inc. after that.
Yeah.
And Don Newton on that, absolutely brilliant stuff.
Well, brilliant, I don't know, but it did have a lot of passion in it. I had to because the artists were all these kids, I don't remember World War II. The earliest memory I have related to it is sitting on the floor with my parents looking at a newspaper and talking about the atomic bomb, 45 when I was 4 years old. I have later they still had, games with zeros and, fighting whatever, but, I didn't really know much about it. I knew the war was kind of going on. Later, my father was like 4F or something, and, but I had an uncle, who gave me a hand grenade when he came back, and I was throwing it at people for years, and I was but I don't know why. When I lived in New York, I remember Tora, the big movie about Pearl Harbor, was playing about 2 blocks away at a theater. I didn't even go see it for a while. So I was interested in the war, but I wasn't a fanatic about it. And then I began to write comics about it, and I found I really enjoyed that. And I was, especially the home front stuff. But then I brought it to England for a lot, because after all, they're called the Invaders. They got to go somewhere besides America to invade something. And you know why the book was called The Invaders? Well, the thing is, back in '68, right before books like Hulk, or features like Hulk got their own books, Stan had done that one issue, was it number 100? In which Submariner and Hulk fought for the whole issue, Marie Severin drew it. Stan the man and Marie the she, they were doing that. And he had this idea, he liked that so much, he was thinking about really teaming them up, although they could, I guess they'd been fighting all the time, and in a series called The Invaders, just the two of them, called The Invaders, And he changed his mind after a couple of days, decided, well, after a while he would get old, so he didn't do that. So when I left, when Stan and I came to a difference and I was going to leave and take a contract, besides Conan, I wanted a book or two that would keep me busy and outside the mainstream. I didn't want to write Spider-Man. I didn't want to have to, he's in several books. I don't want to have to confer with the other writers, see what Spider-Man's doing and what we can do. I'd had 9-10 years of that by that time. So I figured I gotta make a book. I said, and I remember that Stan and Jack had done these retellings of some of the old World War II Captain America stories. You know, and I liked that. So I said, I'd like to tell stories set in World War II with Human Torch, Captain America, and Submariner. Some of the old characters, maybe a couple new ones. And it's got Captain America, who's big. It's got a Human Torch, who's known, Submariner. So I go into Stan, but I think I got to have a name. So I go into Stan, I tell him this idea, and he's kind of looking at, you know, oh, yeah, it's World War II. He wasn't real big on, you know, the idea of doing something in the past and such. I said, and I got a real great title. And he says, what is it? The Invaders. He forgot that he had, you know, had that idea several years earlier. By this time, it's about 7 years earlier. And he says, I like the title. He says, okay, do it. And he just, you know, I never reminded him that, of course, that I had stolen the title from him. You know, I think he had stolen from the TV show that was on about a year called The Invaders, but that was way in the past by that time. But, you know, you gotta, you know, we try to trick each other, you know, on ways here and there. We were a pretty good team. And Invaders was never a big seller, but Frank Robbins knew World War II stuff, and he was a great collaborator on the stuff, even if the kids never liked his work that much.
Yes, he was an unusual artist.
Yeah.
Didn't quite work for Colman.
No.
As I said, we're going to have to wrap it up. We'll just come to more questions because it's now 1 o'clock. We'll give a big thanks to Roy Thomas.